So George, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on this episode. And the last time that you and I spoke, we talked a little bit about Affinis and we mentioned Phixius there. So I wanted to take the time today really to dive a little bit more into Phixius, and perhaps maybe you could kind of like unpack or give us a little bit of a 101 explanation of what Phixius is.
Yeah, certainly. Glad to be here again, Ryan, and excited to talk about Phixius. I think the story for Nacha and the Phixius platform today, one, I'll start off saying Nacha certainly well known within the industry. We are, payment subject matter experts. Obviously, the ACH network being a very important part of most businesses for their payment exchange, both receiving and sending. But what Nacha's role also in the industry is really a convener, right? And working with the industry to understand better what the issues are and where improvements can be made. So on the topic of Phixius, we began to look at several years ago, again, in very much coordination with the industry, what are some of the issues that businesses are dealing with that may result in them not moving to electronic payments? Or if they move to electronic payments, where are they still seeing some friction and where improvements can be made? And what we learned is that the movement of money works very well for businesses. That is not a concern for them. It's really in what we would call post or pre and post payment processes. These are all the things that have to be done before a payment is sent and after it's sent. What we learned from businesses there is there was a lot of manual processes. So there was a lack of automation. There was also concerns about risk and fraud, about how information is shared and could it be trusted. And so we really continued to look at that opportunity from different areas and how we could serve businesses that are adopting electronic payments. And that is where Phixius was born, is to say, what is a better way in which payment information can be exchanged, or payment related information, I will say. What is a way in which that can be done that doesn't rely on proprietary networks? So you and I don't have to be using the same solution or the same network, but we still are doing business with one another. We need to exchange this data in order to make our businesses work. And so the result of that was the development of what we call Phixius. Now, before we kind of get started and delve down into Phixius, a 101 on that, on what we call the platform. It's called a platform because it consists of three different areas. First of all is the technology. And Phixius is certainly cutting edge technology using open APIs, distributed ledger or blockchain software, really applying that technology in a way I think that really makes sense. The second part of Phixius is really governance. And how do you set a common set of rules that are standard for all users of the platform in a way that everyone plays fairly and they can trust the information they're getting from the platform? And then thirdly, in order for Phixius to work, it requires a network of users. And so I think of those three things: technology, rules and governance, and a user network. And that's what makes up the Phixius platform today.
Yeah, certainly, I think that that's fantastic, and I'm glad that you kind of worked in a bit of the technical details of what's kind of going on behind the scenes there, because I certainly think, as the payments industry continues to evolve here, it's only going to get more and more complex. We've certainly seen over the years of just more and more layers really being built into it. So what I'd like to do then is to kind of almost pull a little of that back and kind of say, like, okay, if I'm not such a technical mindset, what are some of the use cases here that we can kind of give like a point example of, like, okay, if I'm business A and business B here, this is how I would want to use Phixius. So that way then we can really kind of simplify it for somebody to be able to go, oh, okay, I get exactly what this platform is going to be used for.
Yeah, it's a good question, Ryan. So once you build a platform like this, certainly we did not build the platform first and then try to figure out, where are solutions that we can use it. You start the other way. What are the use cases for such a platform, and how do you build it in a way that it can support multiple use cases? I will say as we get into these, not only is interoperability important from one network to another, but what we heard from businesses as well is we wanted interoperability between payment types. So don't go build something for us where we can exchange information for ACH only, or for faster payments only, or for credit card only. We want one, right? That is a huge concern of ours, and having to manage different applications or platforms or softwares or all those things. So in thinking about that, one of the things that a business will struggle with today is really maintaining what we call their master file. A master file is simply a long list of businesses in which I need to pay. They are businesses that I am engaged with. And for many companies, this master file is quite large. It is thousands of businesses. So there are a couple of challenges with that. One, how do I set up the profile? How do I get the data in order to establish it? And then how do I maintain it? How do I keep up with changes? So one of the first use cases for Phixius was something that we call the electronic payment information exchange. This is truly a B2B use case where one business wants to get information from the other business so that they can upload their master file. So we're able to do that securely by those two businesses forming what we call a smart contract on the blockchain of Phixius, and thereby they have exchanged that data without centralizing the data. That was the most important part, is it could not be a solution where business A and business B both uploaded all their information and then permissions were given where they could come get that from a central repository. That is not what Phixius does. Phixius enables the trust between those two endpoints so that they can exchange that data themselves. Phixius doesn't know what the information is, but we do log that that event has occurred on chain. Now, why is that important is the second part of the use case. By logging that information on chain, if any of that data ever changes that was provided to the user of that information, we can provide an alert so that they can come get the refreshed data. So it really was one of the core use cases that we developed for Phixius, and one of the first that was implemented in version 1.
No, I certainly think that that's very interesting because I think businesses certainly kind of, to some extent, and I think that you very well pointed out that it's, hey, we're not logging the data that is necessarily transferring through. We're saying, hey, we know that this event happened. We know that data went through. So it does create that timestamp of, okay, an event at this time between business A and business B did happen, and we can at least confirm that that event did happen. But shifting gears just a little bit here, I think that, I certainly have the absolute pleasure to talk with a lot of people in the payments ecosystem in terms of kind of the next flashy app, the next kind of consumer facing things. And it certainly always fascinates me because then when you start to get into the technical side of things, you ask them like, hey, well, what platform is this built on, or what is this built on? And you start to realize how different, and I guess you can kind of say diverse from a software speaking perspective, it is that all these applications and all these different things are built upon. But the one thing that really has to remain important is, the platform that you're building here, Phixius, the interconnective tissue that gets all these programs to talk to each other, because it's not that, because not all software programs talk to each other in a seamless manner. It can kind of be just a slightly different dialect, if we will, on some of the language, but that can certainly throw things off. If they're expecting a certain message in a certain way and they don't receive it within the other part of the payments ecosystem, it can certainly cause a nightmare situation of just the data or the payment itself not going through. So I would like to then kind of speak to that point, right? Because as we see, software programs are certainly developing at a pretty quick rate. I mean, if you kind of just take a look at, let's just say, JavaScript, for example, you have a whole bunch of different libraries that people are using, and those libraries continue to evolve. And you've also got different programming languages. So I'm curious then to get, what is Phixius doing now to kind of create that stability that no matter what software program or whatever it is that a person is building their next killer app in, that Phixius is being able to provide the stability for not only today, but for kind of future generations here?
Yeah, when we go back to my kind of opening comments about what is included in the Phixius platform, we talked about, first of all, technology. So what you're describing, I think a fair representation of that is data exchanged today, and is it done electronically? I would say yes. But it's primarily done through bilateral agreements. And in each one of these agreements, these two companies, normally one of them is driving this decision, they have already made a decision and are mandating what type of technology will be used, to your point, right? So if you want to come and get access to data that I'm going to expose to you, here's how you're going to do it. Here's the API specification, here's the language it's written in, and that's how it will be. So that's not a bad thing unless you're managing hundreds of bilateral agreements. Now, every endpoint has a different specification. So the first part of Phixius and technology was to standardize that, was to say all endpoints are going to communicate with one another with a standardized API set that Phixius has provided. And in addition, everything from authentication on the platform, key management, all of that is standardized as well. So now all participants have one thing they have to learn and manage. The other part of that, which, you know, again, is not as maybe sexy as the technology, but certainly as important, is back to the rules and governance. So a bilateral agreement does have a section that says, here is the specification in which you will need to follow to connect to my system to get to the exposed data. It also has, here's the things that's going to happen if things go wrong. Here's who's responsible if things don't always work right. And here are the warranties and liabilities that go with that. That's the part of Phixius as well, where instead of having that on a bilateral condition, right, where I have multiple of these things, now I have one, and we're all following that same rule set.
Yeah, I mean that from a software perspective, I mean, there's certainly the rules and governance in terms of just the liability, which I'm sure obviously like the financial institutions and the businesses, they're like, yes, though that certainly needs to be in place here because if things go wrong. But then also from a software developer standpoint, it's fantastic because when you start to develop for it and you go, okay, something went wrong and there's a set standard for it, you know what, if it goes wrong, here's what the message is that I'm going to get back, and can alert you to, oh, okay, I know exactly what it went wrong, versus put, you know, the example that you brought up where it's kind of those unilateral agreements, and if I have to, you know, manage even 50 of those, okay, an error message goes, then you've got to rack your brain of, okay, well, how is it that I'm supposed to handle it in this particular case, when it's just kind of a, hey, I know if it goes from here to any one of these other partners or that are participants with the Phixius platform, I know what the issue is. I can easily solve for that issue that's there, or the way that I'm building my application. I know that when I build it in this manner, I have access to everything else that's there. I mean, that's certainly a fantastic aspect to have. But now I kind of want to take a little bit of a more future view here with Phixius in particular, and maybe kind of talk about what's the roadmap for Phixius if we're kind of looking like maybe 5 years out here.
Yeah, I think the reaction to Phixius has been a good one from the industry, right? In a pretty difficult year to launch anything new. But what we found in both the technology community and the business community, you know, certainly we have had organizations embrace what Phixius is trying to do and sign up as early adopters. So we've been working with these organizations to say, what are we doing today and what can we do down the road, right? Once you built the platform, we've constructed it in a way where it establishes trust between endpoints. So now really the payload can really change based on the use case. What is the data we want to exchange? And in some cases, it's not only information that I don't have that I want to consume, it's data that I already have and I want someone to verify that it's trustworthy and correct, right? And verification of information has become a big deal in the B2B community. Understanding who am I doing business with, if the information they're giving me is correct, right? This is where we see use cases pop up that say, let's do a better job in combating a business email compromise, or even the latest technologies where we see compromise occurring through almost, you know, voicemail, where that voice really feels like it's the person you've spoken with, and yet they're giving you incorrect information as a fraudster. So I think we'll continue down that path, Ryan, of developing use cases. They really translate for Phixius into additional open APIs that can carry these different payload and the warranty and liability that go with those. But we're still you know, really, I think, looking to identify what are the key things that businesses need and want in the immediate future, and that belongs on the roadmap. How can we help financial institutions and other organizations serve those businesses through the APIs that we're developing? But again, I think we'll continue to focus on the areas that we have in B2B, both remittance and payment routing instructions, and how do we do that? One thing I will say, you know, being that it's Nacha and we are the operator of Phixius, it's never intended, and it never will be a payment mechanism. So Phixius doesn't have a roadmap that says maybe one day it could move money and do funds transfer. I think we have enough of those today. And Phixius will be agnostic to those rails, where it can support payment exchange for any type of payment, but it would never move to a payment.
George, I certainly find that the data validation part that you're talking about very interesting, because my mind starts to kind of go in just the fraud prevention side of things for that. But I certainly know that Phixius isn't just kind of that one trick pony of, hey, it's meant for fraud prevention, although that can certainly be a component of it. But the data validation is certainly a larger part of things that businesses can take advantage of. So maybe let's kind of get to the core of that, because I think that that's a very important information that we really need to get across to those individuals listening to this interview.
Yeah, it's a great point, Ryan. And for me, verification of data is certainly very important in the area of reducing risk and fraud. 100%, right? I want to make sure that I don't have fraudsters coming in, giving me bad information, business email compromise, all of that. They are very important things. But at the end of the day, verification is also about having good, wholesome payments, right? Move through whatever network, and having exception-free payment processing. So by verifying data, not only of where payments should arrive, where am I posting money to, but also the data that's going to come with that that payment, that really plays out into cash application and how I'm applying the payments and reducing a lot of the exceptions and manual work that goes into that. And at the end of the day, a lot of this payment information exchange can also absolutely reduce the number of checks that are being written. Because in a lot of times, right, the lowest common denominator, if I can't exchange or verify this data properly, I'm just going to drop that to it. And that's where we see a lot of checks that are still being written by businesses. So a lot of opportunity there as well. Elevator pitch, that's what Phixius does, right? It makes it easier for companies to do that. I think, what I want our audience to know as well is that this road that Nacha has been on, from proof of concept to pilot to production, we are in production, right? We announced in October that Phixius is in general release. We are signing up companies today who will engage in pilots next year on the platform. They are in production, but they are kind of soft releases, if you will. And we would want anyone listening to this podcast or this video cast to understand that you can contact Nacha, and we are onboarding what we call credential providers onto the network as we speak.
Excellent. That's certainly fantastic news there, George. So George, thank you so much for taking the time today for speaking to me about Phixius, and I hope to have another great interview with you soon.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.